This is Studio 809.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast. I'm your host, Hiking Bob Falcone, and you can find me on my website at hikingbob.com, which has links to my social media, my columns at the Colorado Springs Independent, all the other podcasts I've done, also my photography website where you can check out my photography. And also you can leave me a message or sign up for my newsletter, all of that at hikingbob.com. And one last thing, if you like this podcast and you enjoy it, you can also help support it by going to Patreon, patreon.com/hikingbob, and be rewarded depending on your level of support for the podcast. And I'd really appreciate it because it helps pay the bills, which is important. Today, we have a really special guest. A person who has recently retired after a long career in the National Park Service as a ranger and has written a book about her experiences. And the book is Across Yosemite's Wilderness, a Trailblazing Woman's Career Protecting the Park's Backcountry. And the author is Laurel Munson Boyers, and she's here to talk about her book with us today. Laurel, thank you for being on the podcast.
My pleasure. It's a treat to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm a big fan of staff at the parks, at any of the parks. You know, I volunteer at state parks. I volunteered at city parks. I visit national parks. I enjoy seeing all the staff there. They are, generally speaking, and I shouldn't even say generally, almost without fail, friendly and informative and always willing to help out. So when I see somebody like you who's written a book about their experiences, like, I want to know all the inside stuff and I want to know what we don't get to see. And your book does that. So tell us a little bit about your book, why you wrote the book and what you talk about in the book. Your career is interesting. You were born at Yosemite National Park, for crying out loud, and spent your life there. So tell us about your history there.
Well, the book follows both my personal history to some extent, but it's also a history book about 3 decades of park management of the roadless areas of Yosemite. So it follows both my life and park policy, but also my passion for teaching people about wild places and the importance of nature and the importance of being aware of the necessity of wild places to future generations. And I wrote it because I spent my entire career, I spent 31 years in the Park Service, primarily in wilderness management. And I spent so much time and effort helping people understand these key components of my life and what I felt was important, that when I retired, it was sort of like, oh, now what am I going to do? So I figured that this would be a way for me to continue my desire to continue teaching people about these places and why we need nature, why unchanged ecosystems are going to be critical as life becomes more and more tangled up with technology and development and population increases and the loss of naturally functioning ecosystems in so much of the world. So, and it was COVID. So like many others, I thought, oh, well, I'll write a book. I'm stuck in my studio. I think I'll write a book, or at least start writing. And I enjoyed writing. It was fun. This is my first book. I've never really written anything in government grants, and I've written a few stories, but I loved writing. And I found that it was important to tell my story in my own voice. And that was very rewarding to me. I enjoyed digging up memories and trying to figure out how to express things to people that would help them enjoy and be enthusiastic about my message. So it was a labor of love. It took 5 years. So yeah, it's coming out, and I'm sort of have a nervous stomach about it, actually. I think it'll be good, but it's exciting.
Well, you definitely shouldn't have a nervous stomach about it. I've been reading the book and I found it to be incredible. It's very informative. The first half of your book is about your last patrol with a group of other rangers and other Park Service staff in the Yosemite. A multi-day on horseback deep into the backcountry of Yosemite National Park. I find that very enlightening. I think that a lot of people like myself, and I'm kind of like the average user. I'm not a through hiker. I'm not necessarily a backpacker. I'm the guy who likes to go out, hike 5 or 10 miles and, go back and then the next day go hike another trail. I think I'm like probably most of the people out there, most of the people who visit national parks.
Right.
When I read that, I was astounded by the depth and remoteness of
Yeah.
the park.
Yeah.
And with that, the work that has to go into that. Can you talk a little bit about the work that goes into managing those far-flung, deep, I mean, you're on horseback for days to get to some
Yeah.
places.
Yeah. Yeah. That was an incredible trip. We started at the furthest south we could get on a trail in the park and rode for 10 days all the way across the park. We crossed a road once in 10 days, which is magnificent. And one of the reasons parks are important is that there aren't roads, aren't fences, that you can ride for 10 days and only cross one road. And we spent, as I say, as I said in the book, it covered sort of a lifetime of managing this place in so many different ways. The park is one of the beauties of wilderness is that it's multifaceted. It's not just one thing. Like there's park interpreters, or there's law enforcement rangers, or there's maintenance people. And one of the things that is necessary in the wilderness, because it's a piece of land that's the size of Rhode Island. I mean, Yosemite National Park is 1,200 square miles. So it's this big chunk of land that is very remote. And the people, the few of us that are back there get to or have to do everything that it takes to manage those areas. And it's quite an honor. It's complex. One of the things you said, I went with some of the rangers. I was able to go out with the chief park ecologist, a very well-renowned scientist, and the man actually that developed the wilderness policy for the science behind the wilderness policy, that set the quotas, did all the scientific research for what fair quotas would be, what was going to be impacted by human presence in the wild areas. Another member of the group was the chief ranger, who's in charge of all the backcountry rangers, as well as the fire guys and the dispatch and the emergency response people. And so it was really a wonderful look at the multi dimensions of what that big chunk of land is, and then to have the wonder of being out there. All of us that backpack know what it's like. You go out there and it's like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. This is so breathtaking, and sometimes it's hard and scary, and sometimes we don't like it, but sometimes we're absolutely thrilled to the depth of our soul with being out there. And that's what it was. It was a really amazing trip, and it was fun to ride. It was fun to use that as the frame that I hung a bunch of different stories. Yosemite is so complex. There's so many different things to talk about and think about as you go. And that last patrol was sort of like going for a walk with a good naturalist. It's sort of like, yeah, and over here you'll see this and that, and over here, oh, by the way, this is a historic spot. And it gave me such a free rein to talk about a whole variety of things that I love about these big pieces of protected land. So that was fun. It was fun to go. I hope people enjoy it. Come for a patrol with me.
What I liked about that whole first half where you're on this patrol is every day you talk about where you're going and who you're with, but you also bring up memories you had of being back there during your career. You mentioned,
Right.
and I kind of brought up that you mentioned in the book, you were born at Yosemite National Park. Your parents worked there.
Right.
I believe they were concessionaires there. They ran correct me if I'm wrong, the inn there, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, actually, I have both my parents had a relationship with the park. Um, my mother's family had a multi-generational relationship, and her family actually came to the foothills just below the park, just south of the park, in the late 1800s, and provided goods for the first gold miners and entrepreneurs that came into the foothills to develop the foothills, and ran a stagecoach way station in the early days. And my great grandfather welcomed Teddy Roosevelt when he came with John Muir to the park, because he was kind of the mayor of this little town. And so they were very instrumental. They were caring for the first tourists back in the early 1900s. And then my mother started working in the park when she was in college. She'd come up and work in the park, and they lived in Berkeley. And then my father was raised in British Columbia, and he came down when he was 17 and started washing dishes for the company. And they married, and eventually, or right after they got married, actually moved to Yosemite and had a life there with the concessionaire, and had a number of interesting, well, mom raised the kids, but dad had a bunch of interesting jobs. Used to push off the firefall, ran the high Sierra camps. So he had some interesting jobs that had to do with nature. And I think that's one of the reasons I am who I am, was because of their involvement in the park and their belief in the wonder of that place. And that certainly got to me. Plus the idea that I think the first 5 years of your life are supposed to be the most influential, right? You're 0 to 5. And can you imagine being raised in Yosemite Valley? That's where you first get your glimpse of the world, is Yosemite Valley, and to be raised in that magnificence. It's just, I'm sure it was as stunning to me as it is to new visitors anywhere. We just got to live there. So that was fun.
I can imagine getting out of there and going, wait a minute, you mean the rest of the world doesn't look like Yosemite Valley here? This isn't what it
Yeah.
looks like?
Yeah, exactly. Plus, it's the world on vacation, so it was a bit of a shock to find out what the rest of the world was having to deal with, and not just having fun and taking pictures and stuff. So,
Sure.
yeah.
You spent your whole career there. Is that is that unusual when then or even now for people to spend an entire career in one place? Did you I was in the Air Force,
Yeah,
nobody spends much time in one place. It's extremely rare unless
yeah,
they have a very specific
yeah.
skill set, and only one place does that. Um, did you have to manipulate the system so you stayed there, or did it just work out that way for you?
Uh, well, there's two sides to that. One was um, I traveled extensively for about 25 years. I traveled all over the world, um, and had a number of amazing adventures and opportunities, and got to meet a lot of fabulous people. So I personally didn't feel like I was isolated, like I was stuck in this big granite hole. Um, so, and also, well, okay, so that's personally. Professionally, you're absolutely right. It used to be that they would march people off to different jobs, that you couldn't stay in one place for a while. Um, and my situation was a little bit different in that I had this unique relationship with the park because of my background, and the fact that I was very well suited for my job, and it was a little more unique situation than some people have. I would say you're right. Most people have to move around to make progress in the Park Service and gain other skills, and it's appropriate because you learn everywhere you go. You learn more things. I did work for the fire department, or the fire organization in the park. I worked as an interpreter. I led environmental backpacks. I worked for resources management, did the NEPA of all things, the planning stuff. So I wasn't only just a backcountry ranger, and I worked through the backcountry operation you kind of start as a wilderness permit issuer, and then you work your way up to supervising that, and then you work your way into the office and so forth. So there was a chance for me to progress personally, but also to use the skills that I had developed before to provide benefit to the operation. And one of the key components of that, I think, is that the Yosemite Wilderness is huge. It's 95% of the park. And it takes a lifetime to get to know it. It's not like you just come in on a detail and say, "Oh yeah, I'm here. I'm the new wilderness manager," or whatever. That depth of knowledge of the backcountry and that understanding of what it's like to live back there and be back there is enormously important to the value of how the park manages it. And you can't just run people through the mill. It's, for instance, since I've been retired, I think there've been 4 wilderness managers in just, I don't know, what's it been, 15, 17 years. And they were so tangled up in the bureaucracy and the reality of managing this thing that they rarely got into the backcountry, and they never really knew it. They didn't spend nights on the ground. They didn't hike the trails. They didn't know what, Stubblefield Canyon looked like or why that was important. And I think it's a little bit different. I absolutely agree that you're right about many Park Service jobs, and maybe that's not even true. That depth of knowledge and understanding is important in any Park Service job, or any job, actually, to be frank.
You talk at length in the book, and it's fascinating about, not only the size of it, it's just immense, but how
Right,
different one part of it is to another. And in your 10 days, the different ecosystems and the different things you saw
right,
from one end of the park to the other. And
right,
you were there for 30 years. And
right.
you mentioned how some people were there only there 4 or 5 years. There's no way they could see that themselves. And if the person before them was only there for 4 years and the person before them was only there for 4 years, nobody has got enough information to pass to the next person about that. So that really
Exactly.
is what struck me as making your situation so unique, that
Yeah.
you really got to know that place. I have to wonder, and I'm sure there are other parks that have people who came in during your period who the Park Service philosophy was probably different, and you could stay in a place at the same for a long time. But you have to wonder with, and I'm not faulting anybody for this, but how deep people's knowledge is of parks, the people working there, is of the parks they're working in if they're moving so frequently.
Yeah. Yeah. I I absolutely agree with you. I also think there's value in fresh ideas, fresh eyes, um, new perspectives. I was fortunate, just to get back to what you're saying, I was very fortunate to have come into the operation under someone that had worked there since the 60s. So he had already been there for 15 years before I had been there and worked on trail crews and stuff. And those old timers are they're both a blessing and a curse because we're a little bit stuck in our ways. We think we know a lot, and sometimes we're not right, and sometimes we're not flexible. But one of the values of wilderness and of wild places is that it has a timelessness, and it's one of the things that the legislation is about. It's one of the things that management is about, is that it stays the same out there, except for natural processes. And so it's not quite as stressful, maybe, as being, for instance, a superintendent, where you have to keep up with changing populations or changing administrations.
Yeah.
Imagine that. Um, and so I think with the Wilderness Act and with our approach to the National Park Service's approach to wildland management, or maybe not just the National Park Service, any wilderness area in the nation, that's just a key component. I mean, That's what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be unchanged. It's supposed to be influenced only by natural processes. So we need to just kind of stay out of the way and repair what we can repair if that's appropriate, or prevent what we can prevent, which is usually appropriate. And so it's a little bit, even if we do have to have generational change. And I was glad when I retired after 30 years. It was like, well, are you going to do some consulting? And it's like, it's time for other people to have, it's time for the next guys to have their say. It's time for new blood. It's time for new ideas. And I had this incredible, amazing, wonderful period in my life, and did what I could do. Didn't accomplish everything, accomplished some cool stuff, but had some success, had some failures, and I just felt it was important to move to let the next person come along. I hope that someone stays a little bit longer than the last people, because you're so right about it being something that you have to know in your soul to really do it properly, I think.
I spent my career in the fire service, and if there's a thing that's embedded with tradition and stuff, it's the fire service.
It is, yeah.
And I was always stuck with this two-pronged thing. One of the things I hated when I asked somebody why we did something a certain way was because we've always done it that way. I hate
Yeah.
that answer.
Yeah, yeah.
Every once in a while, somebody's got to sit back and go, why do we do it that way? And maybe it turns out that that is really the best way to do it.
Yeah.
But if you don't sit back and look at that and say, is this really the best way to do it? You're stuck doing the same thing. So I'm kind of like, but on the other hand, I tended to stay at the same fire station for years.
Yeah.
I like staying there because when somebody else came in, somebody gets promoted and I get a new captain or something like that, I'm the guy who's been there for a long time, and I can tell them exactly how that neighborhood worked, and
Exactly.
that address is this history, and this part of town has that history. You have to have that good mix of that institutional long-term knowledge. And the people at the
Right.
top could change because they bring in the superintendent at Yosemite could change, and they're bringing
Right.
new ideas and they're up to date on what Washington wants. But
Right.
down further down the pile, which is probably not the
Right.
best way to put it,
Right.
you need those people who've been there a long time to tell the superintendent, well, you're never going to make it to Stubblefield Canyon, which you just mentioned, but I've been there and this is what it's like. And
That's
he
right.
needs to hear that from you. But if
Yeah.
those people are changing every 4 years, they're never going out there. So how do they
Right.
know what that place looks like?
Right. Right.
Um, so it's always that you don't want to get stuck in your ways because then progress passes you. But
Right.
boy, you need to know what's going on. So you need those people who've been there a long time. So I that's why I really appreciate that you were there so long and you had to have a significant impact. I'm sure you saw a number of superintendents come and go in that park, and a number
Yeah.
of chief rangers. They probably relied on you to tell them what was going on back there because they're never going to get back there.
Yeah. 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 And when they did get back there, it kind of knocked their socks off, which was fun.
Yeah, for them it's probably just a camping trip. They don't even have time to really absorb it. They're like just
Yeah.
standing and go, wow, what's
Yeah.
going on here?
Yeah. But even one trip, as probably your listeners know, even one trip opens your eyes to the value of why it's back there and what it's about. Yeah. And the other thing that I think is important is science helps us work through those, helps us to uh, deal with policy changes, address previous mistakes, adapt to changes in the public. So it's not, it isn't just it isn't just up to, management by personality, which is something that I think is also happens. And clearly I did management by personality because that's me, but Yosemite is such an incredible gathering of smart, talented, caring, interesting people that we all work in this big soup of trying to make it work together. And I'm sure. Again, I shouldn't just say Yosemite. It's any big organization is like that, but and certainly the all parks and public lands have this group of really dedicated employees that really care deeply about it, and we all work together to make it function well and do what we hope is the right thing, which is key. We hope it's the right thing. You never know.
Well, and you mentioned briefly that your dad did the firefall at Yosemite.
Yeah,
He did it the old
yeah,
way, where they would actually burn
yeah,
stuff
yeah. Push burning coals off
off of
Glacier Point.
which
Yeah,
which is a great photo opportunity. But now I
yeah,
think we sit back and go, well, that's probably not the best way to do things. So they stopped
yeah,
doing that. You learn
yeah,
as you go along.
yeah.
But you need those people who been there. It impresses me to see somebody who spends not only 30 years with an organization, which is almost unheard of nowadays, but 30 years in the same place in that organization. I think which is what really is what I'm still taking away is the key thing from this. Your depth of knowledge of that is probably never going to be matched. Um, at that park and maybe many other parks. I have no idea. I don't have no idea who might be 30 years
Yeah,
at Rocky Mountain National Park, which is, hop, skip, and a jump from where we're at.
yeah,
But it just seems like that's just not the way people do things. It's not the way people do
yeah,
things at all. Nobody stays in one company for very long anymore. So
yeah,
to see that is really
yeah,
impressive to me.
yeah. Well, I'm sure there's pros and cons of it, but I
Yeah.
think it was certainly mostly a pro for me. And I had some other um, extenuating circumstances. I had a wonderful place to live. I had a supportive spouse. I had the job fit me
Hmm.
um, personally and professionally. I found purpose in place, and I think that's really key. I think if you are lucky enough to find purpose in place in one spot, then why would you move on?
Right. So,
No,
I guess we should tell you didn't have to stay there. I mean, it was
no,
your
no.
choice to
Oh,
stay there.
no. No, no, not at
You
all.
elected to
No,
stay there. Yeah.
no, I elected for absolutely. I elected to stay. It was my spot.
Right.
And and if you're lucky enough to find your spot, you're really lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Way cool. So let's talk a little bit about your experience there. Um, what are, you talk a lot about what you did as a backcountry ranger, and you started out as a wilderness ranger. You started off, you mentioned being in that little tiny hut in the middle of the parking lot, giving
Right.
people their permits, which
Right.
is, it sounded like it was about the size of a porta potty. It may have been just a little bit
Yeah.
bigger than that when you started out. When you
Exactly.
describe it, I'm
Yeah.
going, how did you stick out both arms and not touch the walls? And the thing, it sounded like it was really tiny. Um,
Right.
I think the public has a perception of what a ranger does, but
Uh-huh.
give me an example of something that a wilderness ranger, somebody in the backcountry, might do as part of their job that maybe the general public doesn't know about or may not realize it's part of their job.
Well, I think that people normally, not maybe not normally, I think there's a common perception that backcountry rangers are all about recreational use. We're all about hikers. We're all about, out there checking permits and answering questions and stuff like that. But one of the things that I loved about this job was that we were little independent park services ourselves. We did everything. We did maintenance, we cleaned, we took a shovel and opened up water bars, we did wildlife monitoring, we did search and rescue, we did interpretation, we did resource management, we did cabin management, we got flown to the top of El Capitan to do search and rescues, we did snow surveys. It's not just about hiking and backpacking and checking wilderness permits. It's a really wonderful job. Probably one of the reasons I stayed in it. It's this great job, but it's a little different than some other jobs because we are so independent out there. We're really the only person for literally, like my patrol area in the south part of the park was 200,000 acres. So I did everything in 200,000 acres, or at least as much as I could. Obviously, there were other work groups that came back there to do some of it, but I think that's kind of a nice way for people to think about backcountry rangers, that they're not just out there to be the, the permit checkers. They're out there really managing a whole variety of important components that make up what is valuable about national parks. So I guess that's how I would answer that.
So kind of like a jack of all trades. You really are, and you mentioned you went to law enforcement training, you were a law enforcement officer, but you did
Yeah,
so many other things.
exactly.
And
Exactly. Yeah.
I think that was the key thing I took away from that. And even if you mentioned that you get other people, other workers to come out there, to do other things, but it's not like you're back there. So it's not like you can make a radio call and say, hey, I need somebody to come up here and take care of this. It might be a month or I guess before they
Or
can
more. Right.
gather the stuff and arrange for the days that they're going to be not in the
Right.
main part of the park, but be
Right.
backcountry to get back
Right.
there. So you have
Right.
to kind of do it yourself until, or at least fix something until it holds up, till somebody else can get back there and do a more permanent repair or work or something.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And again, luckily, the system that's in place in the front country tries to minimize those problems. So the work that we always tried to do everything that we could, like when you get your permit, we try to do this heavy dose of education so people don't hurt themselves or hurt the backcountry. So it minimizes those problems. So we can leave you alone in the backcountry, so you can have a real wild experience. So you're not dealing with people in uniforms coming into your campsite or whatever, unless you like that. I mean, some people like that. But it's an interesting, I mean, we don't do everything. For instance, in the book, there's lots of stories about the trail crews, which is a whole nother society back there and fascinating. I love the trail crews. Great group of people and such important work. And really, the trails are the most important minimum impact tool in the wilderness. They are the thing that keeps the wilderness wild and keeps people safe. And so I have the utmost respect for trail crews and what goes on. And they're supported by the packers. And there are other groups that come sporadically into the backcountry. Researchers and the High Sierra camps had interpretive trips that went from the high camp to high camp. But there is a society of people back there that it isn't just necessarily me alone back there. It's particularly in the sense of the trail crews. They were such a huge part of that.
One of the things you wrote about, and I'm glad you mentioned the trail crews. I spent time doing trail work, building trails, and doing that kind of stuff. And you do mention in there, and I highlighted as I'm reading the thing about why trails are built the way they are. And it's management of water, which is the biggest thing, keep the water from coming over. So
Right.
all
Right.
that stuff matters. And I think people just get lost in that. Like a lot of people don't understand, why is a trail built this way? Why can't I just go straight up the mountain? Well, because that's a good way to
Yeah.
go most of the mountain. That's why we don't do
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
You talk a lot about being at that backcountry permit station. And you mentioned managing the backcountry visitorship, and you're back there in the 70s and 80s doing this kind of stuff. How would you compare the average backcountry person 30 years ago, 20 years ago, to the people who are trying to experience more of that backcountry experience nowadays? Do you think they're better? They have better knowledge, better equipment's gotten better. We can talk about that. You talk a lot about carrying a wool or down-filled wet sleeping bag and how long it takes for that to
No
dry
good
out.
for nothing.
Yeah.
No, they're nice and toasty when they're dry.
Oh yeah, they're great when they're dry, but they're terrible when they're wet.
Right.
How is the person going backcountry nowadays different than the person who was back there when you were a younger ranger working that backcountry permit station? Do you think that people who go back there now have more respect for the backcountry, less respect? Where do you think we're at with that?
Well, my immediate and very strong response to that is that technology is pervasive and addicting. And I am very concerned that people will continue to value other living things if they have no real physical connection with them. I wonder if some people maybe, I think technology now takes some of the risk and some of the why and where of a wilderness visit and changes people's perceptions of what they're doing there. Are they doing it for selfies? Are they doing it to put it on Facebook? Are they doing it to, say that they did it? I listened to the other day a really good podcast. This person was using his phone as a map, basically, and then he arrived at his destination and it mapped out all the potential campsites and said, this is a good campsite over here, and this is a bad campsite. And I'm very afraid of that. I'm very sorry that one of the things that's so valuable about wilderness is it takes you back to some core values where you have to use your own sense, your own senses, your own intelligence. You have to deal with risk management and think about what you're doing. And I'm very concerned that technology has changed that significantly. And I'm very old-fashioned in that. I get it. I see why people use GPSs. I see why people, use the computer. I use a computer. But from a wilderness perspective, I think that that's a sad development. I think that people will miss out on that. Glory is a weird word, but that wonderful connection with nature that you make just with your own senses. You don't need a machine to do this. In fact, you're putting up a wall in front of you if you depend too much on it. And I'm not saying that people are going to put away their phones or whatever. I'm just sorry to see people as dependent now on technology and that they're not getting the full value out of their trip, in my opinion. So that's the biggest thing.
Some of my
To me.
favorite hikes are ones where there's no cell phone coverage, and I
Yeah,
can't
yeah,
I can't communicate with the outside world. I mean, I'm on the fence with technology. I think you probably I have a
yeah, of
GPS. I use it all the time. I use it to
course.
track every
Yeah,
hike. I
yeah,
record every hike I go on. I have an
yeah,
emergency locator beacon that if something happens, I push a button. Somebody's going to know I need assistance and come get me instead of waiting days. Well, Bob was supposed to show up 5 days ago. Maybe we should go look for him,
right,
kind of a thing, which is not good.
right.
But I also, we did a whole podcast a couple months ago about artificial intelligence and photography and how it warps people's
Right,
perceptions because they take these photographs and they manipulate them and add things and
right.
subtract things, and people go out there and go, "This isn't what I expected." Instead of just sitting there going, "Well, regardless of what I expected, this is beautiful anyway."
Yeah,
And just taking that appreciation in
yeah.
there. Do you find that people are more respectful of the outdoors now than they were then, or are they better then than they are now as far as taking care of things? Or what do you think that people's respect for the outdoors is, for taking care of the resources?
Well, I think thanks to the work that you, among others, have done, there is more understanding of the consequences of our actions back there. So I think that education's done a great job. I think we've been very successful in helping understand what happens if a bear gets your food, or how campfires affect the soil underneath it, or whatever, if people listen to it. And the more experienced users learn every time that they go out. The beginners, all want to hear about the bears. But I think that people, whether they're generally more respectful, I think that standards have changed a little bit, or quite a bit, actually. That there used to be maybe not more tolerance, that's not the right word. We've learned that you shouldn't bury your trash. We used to tell people, bury your trash. We used to
Right.
tell people to throw rocks at bears. We used to tell people a number of different things. And I think we've learned a lot. So I think that the backcountry is absolutely in better shape than it used to be in terms of public use. I think there are some things that there's more restrictions. So maybe if you have to try harder, for instance, to get a quota, maybe to get a permit because of a quota, maybe you value it more. It's kind of like if you have to use your own money to buy something, you like it better rather than just have your mom give it to you or something.
Right.
So I think there's more ownership maybe I hope that's the case. I hope people feel that way. I think the restrictions have been helpful. There gets to be a little bit of herd mentality in anything you do. So when there were sort of unlimited groups of people, it was easier to make noise. It was easier to leave trash. There were other things. Now that it's a little more, not controlled, but when there isn't that herd mentality, when you don't go a lake and there's 200 people there, maybe you're likely to be a little more respectful. So in that sense, I do think it's a little better.
Okay. Yeah, we're seeing more and more permitting and restrictions on numbers of
Yeah.
people. I have very mixed opinions of that. I think in some ways it takes some spontaneity out of people going to visit,
Yeah.
especially people who
Sure.
don't have the not fortunate enough to be able to say 2 months from now I'm going to take my family to this place. They may not be able to do that because of work. I'm a little concerned about that, but on the other hand, I agree that if we don't have 1,000 people at this lake, but we have 100 people, obviously 100 is better than 1,000 because of the impact
In
it might
some
have
ways.
or something.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. I do agree
Um,
with
I'm
that,
sorry.
but I also think that those regulations safeguard basic values that people support. So in that sense, I think it's okay. And one of the things that we were adamant about was that there had to be room for spontaneity. There had to be a place for first come, first serve. If you were willing to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and stand in line, then you were by golly going to get a permit. And if you weren't, well, somebody else was willing to do it. But and I think one of the things that we're seeing with the reservations, I hope we're seeing with the reservation systems, for instance, the day use reservation system that's in a pilot situation right now in Yosemite is that you can make a reservation for day use, or you can come in, for instance, in the current pilot program after 3 o'clock.
Right.
And that allows for that spontaneity. Yeah, it's not perfect, but we're not saying you can't come. And I
Right.
think I think managers have a obligation to support exactly what you're talking about. You have to you've got to give people that opportunity for spontaneity. And that's actually part of wilderness. What a wilderness experience is
Right.
has that spontaneity. So it was really important to us.
Awesome. Yeah, Rocky Mountain National Park, which has had a pre-reservation system in place for a couple of years, and they're doing it again this year. They do have, if you get there really early in the morning or later in the afternoon, you're
Yeah,
exempted from that whole thing. Now,
right.
how many people could argue that it takes away the prime part of the day? I'm a landscape photographer. That early morning and that late afternoon is exactly when I want to be there. I want to catch
That's
sunrise
right.
and sunset.
That's right.
So that's
It's
for me,
never
that's
perfect.
perfect. But if you're a
Right.
family with, a couple of 4-year-old kids and stuff like that, getting them up early in the morning may be a challenge.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
um,
Life is difficult.
yep. None of this is easy. I have been to Yosemite National Park just once. It was one of the first places I visited when I retired. I went there. I spent about a week there, stayed in Mariposa, so it was a drive
Uh-huh.
back and forth there every day.
Yeah.
Enjoyed the daylight. I put out a calendar every year of my
Nice.
photographs. This year's calendar was waterfalls, and I have a picture um, of the Bridal Veil Falls from across the lake. Uh,
Uh-huh.
yeah,
Well, not across the lake, across the river. Yeah.
yeah, across the river,
Yeah.
which turned to be one of my favorite pictures. I've hiked all the way up
Yeah.
to the top of Yosemite Falls and
Nice.
stood at the
Yeah.
top where it goes right over the edge. Probably some
Yeah.
park ranger would have seen me and yelled at me for being that close.
No, no, no. That's wilderness out there.
Yeah,
That's what risk is about.
yeah.
Yeah.
I've done all that stuff. Yosemite's beautiful. I want to come back out there and visit it again. I want to spend some more time out there. I had a little bit of a issue where for some reason this almost never happens to me, but I had leg cramps really bad for a couple of days when I was
Oh,
out there, could hardly
oh,
move, and that almost never happens to me. But it happened on my one trip to Yosemite, for crying out loud. It doesn't happen when I'm home and I can go there another day or something.
right,
Um,
right. Well, Yosemite Falls Trail is a steep one, so
and,
that's probably why.
and that was a tough one. But what a beautiful, beautiful place.
Yeah.
Um, the book is awesome. I want everybody to read the book to understand a couple things. A, the life of a wilderness ranger. get a appreciation of what Yosemite National Park is like, the part that probably most people don't get to see. I mean, I'm sure most people don't get to see it. Um, Understand why some of these policies are in place. We've talked a little bit about this. And just really understand the work that the National Park Service does and what people do in your career there. Let's talk a little bit about the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and that's the things that have changed with the current administration and the budget cuts. And I know we don't want to make this a big political thing, but I feel like we can't really avoid it. What do you see as the effects of what's happening right now politically with the Park Service and Yosemite National Park? Are we digging ourselves into a hole that we can't get out of, or is some of this maybe for the better, or where are we at with this?
I am heartsick about the state of affairs for so many different things in the world. But I will just pull that back into discussing my neighborhood here. And maybe it fits for the larger picture. One of the major concerns that I have, and actually we touched a little bit on it, is that it has eliminate that the purge of the federal government has taken away much of our generational knowledge, that a lot of the upper level people that have been there for a long time, are taking the early retirement. There's a hesitation by wonderful managers to even stick a toe into management now. There are people in positions that really don't know much about it, that I hope don't do damage as they learn. I'm heartsick for my friends and neighbors that were yanked from probationary positions, because these jobs are labors of love. People aren't making a lot of money out of them. People stay in them because they want to do this work. And the people that were pulled out of some of those easy to grab chainsaw kind of jobs were often that wonderful new voice of enthusiasm and hope and youth in some cases, not necessarily, but many of them were. And then the people that were, for instance, changed jobs and were in a probationary era or probationary period, that was just awful for people that had spent a lifetime and had just recently changed a job, and because of that they lost their positions. And it's so disruptive in a place like Yosemite, where housing is an issue. Finding a place to live, it's you make a huge commitment to be in a place like this, and to have the rug pulled out from under you is is horrible from my perspective. With that said, of course, there are places that the government could be trimmed, and there are places that would do better with more, maybe more specific oversight. There was a little bit of, well, I work for the government, so I can't be fired. There were people like that. I'm not going to disagree with that. But if for instance, a more refined approach had been taken, where you say, okay, you got to get rid of 50% of your staff by the next 6 months, then managers could have figured that out. They could have figured out who's not doing their job or who they could do without. So this slash and burn approach, like now I have friends that are scientists that are cleaning restrooms. I mean, that's true. That is not a media hype. There are people that have, very important work to do, that are now not able to do their work, or managers are head spinning, don't know how to move forward, don't know what to do. And I'm very sympathetic to small business owners, large business owners, everybody except the billionaires apparently have head spinning. Maybe the billionaires do too. But I I I think it's going to be very, very painful for public land. I don't know what's going to happen when we've had closures before, where budget restrictions have taken us down to required personnel only, like law enforcement and fire and stuff like that. Yeah, you see it right away. The wildlife get food, they start hanging out, there's more garbage around. When you say, well, trash cans don't get emptied, well, big deal. Well, what happens is the animals get into the trash cans, and then they develop lifelong socialization that affects literally generations of wildlife, like the bears. The bears, we used to feed the bears on purpose, and now bears are a problem because they hang around trying to get human food. And I think the long-term implications of this are potentially really serious, and I'm heartbroken. I'm glad I'm retired. Hate to say that. Glad I'm retired. I'm sorry for the people that are still here.
I hear you. I saw a comment from one politician that said, "Well, nobody wants anybody, nobody wants people working who aren't pulling their weight." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's true. I didn't like people I work with who didn't pull their weight, but
That's right.
that's not who they're cutting. They're just cutting without, like you said, if they told the superintendent of the park you need to cut X percentage of your people, you figure out who to cut. They're going to
Right.
know who's not pulling their weight and who is. But
Absolutely.
that's not how they're doing things. They're just not
Right.
doing it that way. They're just like, you're probationary, we're cutting you. I didn't realize this till this all started to happen, that in the federal service, when you change a position, you were then classified as probationary. That,
Yeah, really
even if you've
unfair.
been there for 20, that's very
I mean,
odd.
and
Most places
yeah,
don't do that.
yeah,
You might be
yeah,
probationary in that period, but you weren't a probationary employee per se. So that was
exactly.
unusual. I think a lot of people did not know that's how that worked. I'm even wondering if the people who were doing all that cutting didn't realize that that's how they worked, and that's what their the effect of
Oh,
their
I
job.
I don't think so. And if they did, then they're heartless and
Yeah,
uh, stupid,
yeah.
frankly. I mean, that they didn't do their homework and figure that one out. Because if you're going to do stuff like that, it has enormous consequences. And I better be careful what I say.
No, it's
But
okay.
I hate being careful what I say. But you know, uh,
Well, I didn't want to make this a big political thing. Like I said, it was the 800-pound gorilla in the room. The
yeah.
main thrust of this is you have written an awesome book about your experiences in Yosemite's backcountry, 30 some odd years of being a ranger and working for the Park Service and all the things the Park Service does. Um, Folks, you need to get this book. It won't be out for a little while, but you can pre-order it right now, and it is available on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles. The book is called Across Yosemite's Wilderness: A Trailblazing Woman's Career Protecting the Park's Backcountry. Laurel Boyers is the author, and she's been our guest on the podcast. It has been an awesome podcast. I will put a link in the show notes so people can find it. And as it turns out, this coming weekend starts National Park Week. So what a better way
Yay.
to celebrate national parks than pre-order this book. It'll be coming to you as soon as it comes out. And I think you said mid-June is when the book comes out,
Yeah, I think June 17th.
June
Yeah.
17th. So you can pre-order it now. You'll probably forget you ordered it, then a package will show up in the mail, and you got this great book to read, and it'll be a fun book for you to read. I'm looking at an electronic version of it, so I haven't had a chance to look at the awesome pictures that I'm sure are in there. I see captions for pictures. I'm going, in my mind, I'm picturing this going, I bet that's a gorgeous view. Can't wait till the book comes out. So I get to see the book with all the pictures in it and stuff like that. Laurel, thank you
Yeah.
so much for spending the time and being on the podcast,
Yeah.
and thank you for all your years of service to one of the country's most beautiful places, and for a service that I think doesn't get the attention and the gratitude that it deserves. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you, Bob. And been my pleasure. Have fun. Happy trails.
And with that, thank you for listening to the Outdoors with Hiking Bob podcast. We'll talk to you next time.